Chandelier light burned against my eyes as my brother's dismissal cut through the gala hall. I'm Nathan Keaton in my 50s, a quiet director who thought I'd earned my seat. The pocket watch in my palm stayed cool while the general turned away. When a room freezes like that, what remains of family? The chandeliers caught the light just so, throwing shards of gold across the ballroom floor. I had only just stepped into the military honors gala, the spring air from outside still clinging faintly to my jacket, when Michael's voice cut through the hum of conversation. "You don't belong here," he said loudly enough for donors and officers nearby to turn their heads. For a second, I thought I had misheard. Then I saw the smirk, the deliberate pause that let the words sink in. My hand drifted to the pocket watch in my vest, a habit more than a choice, its cool metal pressed against my fingertips steady even as the room tilted. Grace's voice whispered in memory, but the echo could not drown out the laughter that rippled like a crack in porcelain. I had come hopeful foolishly, so believing that the Grace Fund might be recognized tonight, that the scholarship would carry her name into a brighter place. The scent of polished wood and perfume mixed uneasily as Michael intercepted me in full view. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "my brother seems to think he's one of us tonight." His words dripped with the easy charm of a man too used to holding center stage. I forced a smile, that quiet, half-hearted curve of the mouth that never fooled anyone. A nearby donor leaned into another, whispering behind a raised hand. Glasses clinked. Laughter swelled and receded. The general, a man who had once shared a handshake with me in another lifetime, turned his head as if I were air. He clasped Michael's hand instead, firm and public, then released it to applause that stung more than silence. I stood still, frozen, my body stiff as the medals pinned across other men's chests. The watch in my hand caught the chandelier's glare again, a reminder that someone once believed in me when the rest chose not to. The music carried on, violins swelling above the din, but I could hear only the thudding of my own heart. Each beat seemed louder than the last, as if daring me to react, to fight. Instead, I let my shoulders drop. To flare up here would have been to prove Michael right, that I was misplaced, unfit lesser. The room hushed briefly, not out of respect, but out of curiosity, as if watching for a stumble. And in that pause, in that collective breath, I felt the cold weight of invisibility settle back onto me heavier than ever. I stepped aside, away from the spotlight that had never been mine. The donors turned their attention elsewhere, their conversations resuming, leaving me a shadow in the corner. My fingers curled tightly around the pocket watch, unbroken still, though the silence around me felt like a fracture. I stared at its scratched surface, the metal cool against my palm, as if it could anchor me to something steadier than this moment. Yet even with the band firm around my wrist, humiliation seeped deeper than I thought possible. The room had frozen me out, and I could do nothing but endure. The headline stared at me from the paper on my desk, "The Forgotten Keaton." The ink smelled sharp in the humid air of my office, the AC coughing once before quitting for good. A photo showed Michael with the general, both framed in light. My own figure sat blurred in the background, an afterthought. I dropped the paper, its rustle louder than it should have been. The stain of a glass ring darkened the wood surface beneath. It reminded me how quickly something cold could vanish, leaving only proof it had once been there. A knock. Then Lenora slipped in. Her pearls quivered as she closed the door. "They were unkind," she said, nodding to the headline. "Efficient," I answered. Unkind would have taken more words. She hesitated, then pressed forward. "Michael's under strain." The company needs stability. You could say something supportive, a statement about family unity. Her voice shook in the warmth. I could smell her perfume over the stale ink and dust. A statement would be easy, I said. The consequences wouldn't. She studied me, fingers tightening on the desk edge. This isn't the time to be stubborn, Nathan. Think of appearances. Think of the workers who'll suffer if this collapses. I thought of all the years I'd already spent as an appearance. The printer in the hall clattered, then jammed, leaving silence heavy again. Tell Michael I'm listening, I said at last. It was the most I could give. Her shoulders eased a little, though her eyes did not. She adjusted her pearls, smoothing fabric that didn't need smoothing. They'll keep writing, she warned softly. Then they'll need new adjectives, I said. She left me to the heat and the headline. On the corner of my desk sat a brown interoffice envelope I hadn't noticed before. The string loop slid open too easily. Inside lay a thin memo, no letterhead, just terse lines, project numbers, fines, and change orders tied to Michael's contracts. At the bottom, check subcontractor list, Riverside job. The paper was cool at first, then dampened under my thumb as sweat bled through. The office smelled of toner and warm dust. My chest tightened at the thought of who had left it, and why now. Lenora's plea still echoed. The memo's blunt words cut deeper family unity on one side, evidence of rot on the other. I held the paper longer than I meant to, until the sweat left a ring that spread across the margin, a stain I knew would not fade. His scent of cornbread rose before I even saw the kitchen again. It lived in memory, the way wood smoke clings to old clothes, stubborn and sweet. Fall in Shenandoah carried its own crispness, apples, ripening leaves curled brown at the edges. But what I remembered most was the warmth that seeped from Grace's oven, spilling into the farmhouse like a second heartbeat. I was younger then, all elbows and quiet ambition, clutching school papers no one else cared to see. Grace met me at the door with that steady gaze, the one that could both soften stone and sharpen steel. She wiped flour on her apron and pulled me in as though my presence filled a space she'd kept ready. Loyalty, she said that day, handing me a plate still hot from the oven, is heavier than blood. Her voice carried the weight of decades. I'd heard family throw around words like duty and honor as if they were medals to pin on each other. But Grace had lived it differently, stitching wounds on the battlefield when gunfire was still a fresh echo in her ears. She didn't boast. She didn't raise her voice. She let her stories work like water on stone, slow, constant, unyielding. She praised my grades the way others praised touchdowns or promotions. The pocket watch she pressed into my hands came wrapped in a cloth napkin that smelled faintly of lavender. This kept me steady when seconds mattered more than years, she whispered. The tick was irregular, scarred by time, but it pulsed steady enough to anchor me. I wore it the way others wore armor. In her farmhouse kitchen, I listened to tales of field hospitals men arriving with little more than names and leaving with scars that spelled survival. She never spoke of glory. She spoke of loyalty soldiers who carried each other farther than their strength should have allowed, who stayed when walking away would have been easier. Those words sank deeper than any cheer from the bleachers or applause from a recital. She saw me the boy others overlooked and insisted my worth wasn't borrowed. When she told me, "You are enough, Nathan," I almost believed it. Now, years later, The farmhouse had long been emptied. Its windows dark, her laughter gone to earth. I sat in my D.C. office letter spread across my desk, the paper rough beneath my fingers. Her handwriting wavered from age, but never from conviction. Honor isn't in bloodlines. It's in the choices you make. I read the line until the letters blurred. Outside, traffic murmured horns sharp against the dusk, but inside all I heard was the tick of that battered watch. Each sound was a call to remember. My brother's name headlined newspapers. Lenora's pleas still rang in my ears. And yet here was Grace steadying me long after she was gone. If she could hold a soldier's hand as he bled, surely I could face the cold stares of family and the sharper edge of truth. I closed my fist around the watch. The cornbread scent lingered in memory, mixing with the papery dryness of her letter, a sensory bridge that carried me from boyhood to now. Her words were not suggestion. They were command. Honor isn't in bloodlines. I whispered it aloud, letting the sound test the air, and the room seemed to nod back in agreement. In that moment, Michael's collapse stopped being a possibility and became a certainty. It wasn't vengeance I felt, at least not fully. It was inevitability. His battlefield would not be fought with medals or headlines. It would be fought with evidence, with paper and ink, with patience sharpened into a blade. I set the letter back into its envelope, careful not to crease it further. The paper's edge caught my thumb, leaving a faint sting, a reminder that even memory could cut. I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned back, the watch ticking against my palm, and understood the war ahead wasn't about family recognition. It was about proving Grace right. Michael's fall was coming, and I would be the one steady enough to witness it. The subject line blinked on my screen before the coffee-cooled district court filing Keaton construction. One click opened a flood. Lawsuit, breach of contract, liens stacking like bricks on a wall, millions in debt spelled out in serif font page after page. The drizzle outside traced patterns down my window, and I knew this was no longer rumor. By mid-morning, I stood on the courthouse steps, the stones slick with rain. Michael was already there, jaw-tight, hair plastered to his forehead. His lawyer clutched a leather folio, as if it could shield them both. Michael's eyes found mine with the panic of a man who'd been the favored son too long to imagine ruin. "Say something for me," he hissed under his breath. "One statement, one assurance you've got credibility I don't. They'll listen to you." The lawyer shuffled pages, the drizzle soaking the corners despite his umbrella. I saw numbers circled, penalties that could gut an empire. I read enough to know the foundation had already cracked. "You want me to shield you with my name?" I asked quietly. "When your own signatures built this mess?" Michael grabbed my arm. "It's family. You think I'd leave you out if it were reversed?" I didn't answer. The smell of wet stone and old paper mingled in the air, a courthouse perfume of every lie and oath that had come before. His desperation pressed heavier than the drizzle, and for a moment I saw the boy he'd been favored and fearless. Then I remembered the headline, "The Forgotten Keaton." We left the courthouse with nothing settled except the inevitability of collapse. He insisted on showing me the Riverside site as if proximity could erase the filings. The tower rose half-born against the gray sky, skeleton steel slick with rain concrete already streaked. Mud sucked at my shoes as I followed him past yellow tape. Workers lingered under scaffolds, their faces turned away. "Look," he demanded, pointing at the shell. "It's progress. Don't believe everything you read. I touched the railing of the staircase slick with drizzle. My watch slipped from my wrist, striking the metal edge with a sharp crack that echoed up the hollow floors. When I lifted it, a hairline fracture split the glass face. Michael saw me staring and sneered. It's fitting. You always did break easier than me. I ran a thumb over the crack, felt its jaggedness against my skin. The tower around us groaned in the wind, scaffolding rattling like bones. You can still help me, he said, voice climbing. A letter to the court, a show of faith. If you don't, this drags you down too. They'll dig into everything, your fund, your record. You won't come out clean. His lawyer shifted uneasily. I heard the shuffle of boots on wet concrete, the cough of a machine stalling, the city itself holding its breath. That's not a promise, I told him. That's a threat. He stepped closer, rain dripping from his collar. Call it whatever you like. If I go down, you'll feel it. I'll make sure of that. The drizzle thickened, running cold down the back of my neck. I looked again at the watch, Grace's gift, once steady, now marred, and knew this wasn't just about numbers on a filing. It was about fractures that could no longer be hidden in concrete, in glass, in family. I slipped the cracked watch back onto my wrist. The tick continued, muted under the chip, but still alive. The tower loomed unfinished, a monument to overreach. Michael's voice trailed behind me as I turned away, the threat still hanging in the air like scaffolding ready to fall. I stared once more at the fractured face of the watch, the drizzle blurring its hands, and understood the shape of the battle ahead. The cursor blinked like a metronome on the screen, steady, unhurried, almost mocking. Each flash reminded me that I hadn't yet pressed confirm. Outside, the city hummed with traffic. Inside, the only light came from the desk lamp, throwing a circle of amber across the papers scattered before me. Grace's words steadied my hand even now. Honor isn't in bloodlines. I whispered it once quietly, letting it settle into the silence the way she used to settle a room with a glance. I had collected enough pieces to build a wall Michael couldn't climb. Email timestamps lined up neatly in a spreadsheet, each row a nail in place. Slack logs innocuous at first glance revealed more when read as a pattern threads, closed too quickly, approvals signed at impossible hours. The 401k statements I'd managed to pull from an old contact showed funds rerouted balances out of rhythm. County clerk records completed the puzzle, stamped with dates that contradicted Michael's glossy brochures. The smell of stale coffee lingered from the cup I hadn't touched since morning, bitter even from where it sat. My secretary, young and nervous, poked her head in once with a stack of inter-office mail. I waved her off with a smile, careful not to let her see the folder names glowing on my monitor. She left quickly, her heels tapping like punctuation marks fading down the hall. I worked methodically, dragging files into an encrypted folder. Each drop came with a click, soft but decisive, as if the machine were nodding in agreement. The server fan hummed in the corner, a low drone that seemed to fuse with the city's distant horns. I labeled the folder Grace Ledger. It was the closest I had to a prayer. Then came the clip. I propped the phone on a stack of case files and hit record. My voice sounded strange in the empty room, low but firm. I spoke of dates of contracts, of betrayals dressed up as business. I spoke of loyalty heavier than blood. For a moment I felt like I was addressing Grace herself, explaining why I hadn't faltered. When I stopped, the silence pressed back hard. I saved the file, added it to the folder, and sealed it all with encryption keys, like locks on a vault. The sweat on my palm smudged the edge of the envelope I used for backup copies, the flap tacky under my thumb as I pressed it shut. Finally, I opened my email client, drafted a short note no more than a paragraph attaching the folder. Facts, plain and unadorned the way Grace would have wanted them. At the bottom, I typed the list of recipients, journalists, board members, regulators. My finger hovered over the scheduler. The screen glowed, waiting. I set the time gala night. The cursor blinked at the edge of send later, insistent, relentless. I hesitated, watching the words on the screen blur with the reflection of the lamp behind me. The city outside moved on indifferent. But here in this small circle of light, I was drawing the line that would divide past from future. My watch ticked steadily on the desk beside me, the crack in its face catching the lamplight. It felt almost alive, syncing with the countdown, as if Grace herself were keeping time with me. I hovered over the key breath, shallow pulse in step with the fractured tick. And then I clicked. The hall was already hot before Michael seized the microphone, but under the chandelier glare it felt blistering. His hand shot out, gripping my arm, pulling me toward the stage as if I were an unwilling prop. The crowd parted. Applause faltered, and suddenly I was under the white heat of the lights, face washed out in front of a dozen live stream cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice booming with the false confidence of a drowning man. "My brother here, Nathan, he's been less than loyal." The words struck harder than the grip on my sleeve. The general standing near the dais arched an eyebrow and then looked away as though even eye contact was too generous. When Michael extended his hand, the general clasped it firmly, pumping once for the cameras. Mine he ignored, pivoting to the next donor without so much as a nod. A murmur rippled through the hall. I could hear it swell and fade, muffled whispers, punctuated by the clink of glass on glass. Somewhere in the back, a reporter's camera shutter clicked like a countdown. On the screens overhead, a ticker crawled, Live Honors Gala Keaton Brothers front and center. The press corps edged closer, pens poised, recording lights glowing like tiny judgmental eyes. I stood still, collar damp sweat tracing the seam of my shirt. The smell of perfume and champagne coated the air, too sweet against the bitterness rising in my throat. I forced myself to breathe, to remember the timer humming quietly in my pocket. The scheduled email was already locked, its evidence poised like a blade. All I needed was patience. Michael leaned into the mic, his smile wide but strained. "You see, Nathan doesn't believe in family unity. He'd rather smear us than support us." The donors shifted, some sympathetic, others curious. Lenora hovered at the edge of the stage, Pearl's trembling eyes darting between us. I caught her gaze for half a second. The conflict there almost undid me. Almost. I kept my mouth shut. That, more than any denial, inflamed Michael. "Cat got your tongue, brother," he sneered. Laughter coaxed from a few obliging guests. I pressed my lips together, jaw tight. Words now would only feed the theater he craved. Better silence, even if it looked like surrender. Reporters shuffled closer lenses, stretching forward, catching the sheen of sweat on my temple, the faint tremor in my hand. My phone vibrated once in my pocket, a notification I dared not check yet. The general cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Let's move along," he muttered, but the cameras caught every flicker, every avoidance. Michael raised his glass. To loyalty, he shouted. Glasses lifted unevenly, applause half-hearted. The sound struck me as hollow like applause at the wrong cue. I stared at the floor, at the reflection of the lights dancing across polished wood, willing myself not to flinch. Every second of silence painted me as beaten, every camera flash a nail in the coffin of my reputation. But beneath it all, the clock was ticking toward release. The hall seemed to tilt as my watch ticked, faintly muffled beneath the noise. My collar clung damp to my skin. I could feel the phone again, another vibration, the signal creeping closer. Michael basked in the moment, unaware of how short it would be. "See?" he said to the room. "He has nothing to say." And he was right for now. The live stream captured it all. My silence, my stillness, the look of a man cornered and diminished. Exactly what Michael wanted, exactly what the world saw. But in my pocket, the countdown edged closer to 0. I could almost feel the moment swell, ready to burst open. I let the corner of my mouth twitch just enough to keep myself steady and stared into the nearest camera lens. The timer was almost done. The ping was sharp enough to cut through the music. Just a notification chime easily missed in a room of clinking glasses and applause. But I felt it like a drumbeat inside my chest. The email was gone, released into the world, unspooling everything Michael had built. The screens at the back of the hall flickered. Spotlights wavered. A murmur rippled through the donors as the projection shifted from a slideshow of medals to a cascade of documents. County clerk filings, Slack logs, 401k statements. Each page turned like a blow struck in public. Gasps rose. A woman at the front covered her mouth. Cameras pivoted in unison, red lights blinking as reporters scrambled. Michael's hand, still on the microphone, trembled. He stammered something about a technical glitch, but his voice cracked under the weight of proof filling the screens. The tick of my pocket watch steadied me. Repaired only days before by a soldier who'd noticed the crack. Its glass now shone clean. I turned it over once in my palm, its weight aligned with the cadence of my heart. Emails scrolled across the wall, approvals signed at impossible hours, signatures mismatched. Then bank statements, pension funds siphoned through shell accounts. Every whisper I'd followed, every record I'd copied, now stood luminous and undeniable before the crowd. Lenora sank into her seat, pearls shaking against her collarbone. The general's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, holding up his hand until the room fell quiet. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying with authority that decades had honed. Michael tried to speak, but the general cut him off. "The evidence is clear. These records, your records, leave no question." Silence followed, broken only by the muffled click of camera shutters. My throat burned with restraint, but I didn't need to speak. The documents spoke louder than I ever could. An aide hurried forward, handing the general a folded sheet. Its edges crackled in the microphone. The decision was read aloud, a reinstatement of my position on the Board of Trustees for the Grace Fund, a public commendation for integrity under pressure. The words rang formal, clipped, and absolute. When the general turned toward me, his salute was crisp. Others followed donors' officers, even hesitant board members rising from their chairs. A wave of hands lifted in unison. I stood very still, the repaired watch gleaming under the harsh lights. The applause swelled, filling the cavernous hall, shaking loose years of silence that had pressed down on me. The cameras captured it all, the salute, the standing ovation, the acknowledgement that could no longer be denied. Michael's face sagged under the glow of the projectors. His lips moved, but made no sound. Lenora stared at her lap, motionless. I raised my hand, slowly returning the salute. For the first time, the gesture felt mine to give, not borrowed. The applause rolled on steady as the tick of the watch in my palm, while my family sat frozen in their own defeat. Snow fell in slow spirals outside my office window, flakes catching in the glow of the street lamps before melting into black pavement. The television on the credenza replayed the footage again and again, Michael on stage eyes, wild words tumbling into incoherence as the evidence drowned him. Crawling headlines carried the rest. Bankruptcy declared. Investigations pending. I muted the sound. The silence of the office was heavier than the broadcast. On my desk, Grace's letter rested beneath the lamp, its edges softened by years of folding and unfolding. The ink smudged in places where my thumb had lingered too long. I traced the familiar line, "Honor isn't in bloodlines." The door opened without ceremony. Lenora stood there, pale beneath her winter coat. Snow crystals caught in her hair. Her pearls hung loose as if even they had given up their composure. "I had to come," she said softly. Her voice carried none of the smoothness of yesterday. She looked around the office as though expecting judgment to seep from the walls. I gestured to the chair opposite. She sat carefully as though afraid of breaking something invisible. "They'll take everything," she whispered. "The house, the accounts. Michael, you can't recover this time." She swallowed fingers, tightening around her gloves. "But the children, they're innocent. They don't deserve this shadow." The snow tapped faintly against the window's small percussion against the hush. I studied her face, tired and raw, and thought of the girl who had once stood beside Michael, basking in reflected approval. Time had etched new lines there. Regret, perhaps. Grace's words whispered back to me. "Loyalty is heavier than blood." I closed my eyes for a moment, and I could almost smell cornbread again, hear the tick of the watch in her kitchen. When I looked up, Lenora's eyes brimmed. "I'm not asking for me," she said quickly. "Only for them. A chance. School safety. Please." The inked edges of Grace's letter caught the lamplight. I rested my hand on it, felt the paper's roughness against my palm. "I'll make sure they're supported," I said. "Through the fund. College opportunity. They'll have a future that isn't tied to this." Her breath broke into a sob, quickly muffled with the back of her glove. "Thank you," she whispered. "It doesn't erase what's been done," I said quietly, "but maybe it begins something else." We sat in silence after that. Outside, the snow deepened, blanketing the city in a hush that softened even the harshest corners. Later, I walked to the small churchyard near my office. The snow crunched under my shoes, the air sharp with cold. I paused at the gate, watching the breath curl from my lips. The silence there felt like sanctuary. I reached into my coat pocket and drew out the watch, its glass newly whole, ticking steady against the night. I closed it in my palm, feeling its rhythm match my own. The pulse was not just time, it was endurance, healing the quiet insistence of hope. For the first time in years, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter, as though Grace's hand still rested there, guiding me past vengeance into something harder, quieter, but truer. The banner stretched across the stage, simple white cloth, with navy letters, Grace Fund Scholarship Ceremony. Sunlight streamed through tall windows of the community hall dust motes turning in the glow. From outside drifted the unmistakable scent of barbecue smoke spice, a reminder that gatherings here were never just formalities. They were family. Children in crisp uniforms sat in the front rows, shoes polished, hair combed into order. Their posture awkward yet proud reminded me of parades long past of beginnings rather than endings. Among them, I spotted Lenora's children, their eyes bright, with something I had once doubted I would ever see reflected back at me, hope unmarred by inheritance. The wooden podium creaked as I placed both hands on it. Its grain was worn smooth where countless speakers had leaned for strength. I cleared my throat, hearing it echo too loudly in the hushed room. Veterans filled the middle row's jackets heavy with pins, their silence carrying the weight of memory. The local press lingered at the edges, notebooks open, cameras resting but ready. I unfolded a page of remarks but didn't look down. Instead, I let the repaired pocket watch tick in my vest pocket, its rhythm enough to steady me. Honor, I began, is not something you are given. It is not inherited. It is something you choose again and again when it would be easier not to. The words landed softly at first, then grew roots. I spoke of Grace, of her steady hands, of the way she had carried loyalty heavier than blood. I told the students before me that their worth would not be measured in last names or titles, but in the choices they made when no one was watching. A shuffle of feet, the faint rustle of papers from the press tables. The scent of barbecue deepened as the doors opened to let in late arrivals, the community pressing in to witness. When the time came, I held out the first envelope. A boy in uniform approached, his hands shaking as he accepted it. Behind him a girl followed, chin lifted high, though her voice quivered when she said, "Thank you, sir." One by one they took their scholarships, their futures secured by something larger than the wreckage my family had left. From the side row the veterans stood. It wasn't rehearsed. It was instinct. Boots scuffed against the wooden floor, hands raised in salute. Not formal, but sincere. One stepped forward, placing a calloused hand on my shoulder. "You've carried it well," he said simply. I felt the burn in my eyes, but did not look down. Instead, I returned the salute, the gesture lighter than at the gala freer, but carrying the same weight of truth. At the front, Lenora's children straightened and lifted their hands too. Their small salutes trembled, but their smiles did not. It was more than ceremony. It was a bridge. Applause began quietly a ripple through the veterans, then the parents, then the hall entire. It wasn't thunderous. It was steadier, rising like a tide, surrounding me with warmth stronger than any spotlight. I closed my fist gently over the pocket watch in my vest. The glass caught the sun unbroken now, the tick inside sure and steady. Grace's words whispered one final time. Honor isn't in bloodlines. It's in the life you choose to fight for. The hall kept applauding, voices and hands carrying me forward even as I stood still. The polish of the wooden podium lingered in the air, sharp and clean, catching sunlight that slid across its grain. I ran a thumb over the smooth face of my watch, the fracture once there, now invisible, its tick folding into the applause that still echoed in memory. Justice had been done, but more than that. Something had been restored, the truth that honor is lived, not handed down. Life has a way of breaking us, yet the cracks can be mended into patterns worth keeping. A short note in the community newsletter would call this a night of grace, but to me it was simply survival turned outward. And what story, I wonder, will you choose to pass forward?